The Grand Forge stood at the heart of Prime, a space station that had trained warriors from across 12 star systems for nearly 1,000 years. Danny Cole walked through its massive doors with 23 other students, his boots echoing against metal floors that had witnessed countless generations of soldiers learning their craft. He was 19 years old, the only human in his training cohort, and today would determine whether he belonged here at all. Instructor Al stood waiting for them at the center of the chamber. The warrior towered over even the tallest students, his 4 arms folded across a chest covered in scales that looked like hammered bronze. His eyes moved across the assembled students with the patience of someone who had broken thousands of young warriors and rebuilt them into something useful. The Grand Forge stretched out behind him like a cathedral dedicated to the art of killing. Plasma cutters lined the walls. Molecular assemblers hummed with quiet power. Tables overflowed with materials that Danny had only read about in academy databases. Crystallized titanium gleamed under harsh lights. Living metal shifted and flowed in containment fields. Energy weave alloy coiled like sleeping snakes, waiting to be shaped into weapons that could cut through starship hulls. Danny had never seen so much wealth gathered in one place. The contents of this single room could purchase his home planet's entire annual budget several times over. Instructor Al began speaking in a voice that rumbled like distant thunder. He explained that today marked the beginning of the forging trial, a sacred test that every student must pass to continue their training. Each of them would craft their own weapon using the materials provided by the academy. They had 72 hours. The designs were their own. The only rule was that they must create something worthy of a warrior. The students shifted with excitement. Danny watched as his classmates exchanged knowing glances, their various appendages and limbs already twitching toward the treasure scattered around the forge. Instructor Al raised one of his 4 hands. He told them to begin. The chamber erupted into controlled chaos. Students rushed toward the material stations with the discipline of soldiers who had trained for exactly this moment. Danny started forward too, but a wall of bodies blocked his path. The students moved first, their tall frames and long arms reaching over others to claim the finest metals. The followed, their strength allowing them to carry loads that would crush smaller species. The worked in pairs, their telepathic coordination letting them gather materials with perfect efficiency. Danny pushed through where he could, but every station he approached had already been stripped clean. He watched a student named claim 3 ingots of crystallized titanium, far more than any single project would need. Their eyes met across the crowded forge, smiled with a mouth full of needle-sharp teeth, and turned away without a word. It took Danny nearly an hour to reach the main material stations. By then, the scene that greeted him told a clear story. Empty containment fields stood where living metal had flowed. Bare shelves marked the absence of energy weave alloy. Even the basic steel and iron had been picked clean, carried away by students who already had far better materials in their possession. They had worked together. Danny understood that now. 23 students from 11 different species had set aside their rivalries long enough to ensure that the single human among them would have nothing to work with. Danny walked slowly through the empty stations, his hands trailing across surfaces still warm from recently removed metals. He kept his face calm. He would not give them the satisfaction of seeing his reaction. Appeared beside him with 2 other students flanking his position. The alien stood nearly a full head taller than Danny, his scaled skin shifting colors with what Danny had learned to recognize as amusement. Asked Danny what he planned to build with nothing. He suggested that perhaps humans were simply too primitive to understand true weapon craft. Perhaps Danny should return to his home planet and practice with sticks and stones until he was ready for real training. The other students laughed. Some stopped their work to watch the exchange. Danny said nothing. He continued walking through the forge, checking every corner and every forgotten shelf. There had to be something left. There was always something left. He found it in the far corner of the chamber, beneath a table covered in dust that suggested no one had touched it in years. A bone lay there, yellowed with age and longer than his arm. It came from some creature Danny could not identify, thick and heavy with a slight curve to its length. Someone had probably used it for a demonstration years ago and simply left it to be forgotten. Danny picked it up and felt its weight settle into his hands. The surface was rough but solid. The material felt dense in a way that suggested hidden strength. Behind him laughed again. He called out to the other students, announcing that the human had found his weapon. He said they should all take note of what passed for craftsmanship among the youngest species in the galaxy. More laughter followed. Danny ignored it. He carried the bone to an empty workstation and set it down carefully. He would need to study it before he could begin working. He would need to understand what it was and what it could become. A shadow fell across his station. Danny looked up to find Instructor Al standing over him. Thus 4 arms hung loose at his sides. His bronze-scaled face revealed nothing of his thoughts. The instructor looked at the bone for a long moment. Then he looked at Danny with eyes that had seen more battles than Danny could imagine. He asked if Danny understood what he was working with. Danny admitted that he did not. He said he only knew that it was what remained. Instructor Al nodded slowly. He told Danny that the bone came from a beast, a creature that lived on worlds so hostile that most species could not survive there for more than a few minutes. He said that bones became harder than stone when properly treated. Then he walked away without another word. Danny looked down at the bone in front of him. Around the forge, his classmates had already begun shaping weapons of impossible beauty and devastating power. Plasma cutters sang. Molecular assemblers hummed. Living metal flowed into forms that would make any warrior proud. Danny had a bone in his bare hands. He picked up a simple file from the basic tool rack, the only equipment his classmates had not bothered to claim. He began to work. The 72 hours had begun. Danny worked through the first night without stopping. The Grand Forge never truly slept during the forging trial, but by the 3rd hour past midnight most students had retreated to their quarters for rest. Their weapons sat in various stages of completion, molecular assemblers humming quietly as automated processes continued shaping metal into forms their creators had programmed. Danny had no such luxury. Every stroke of his file required his hands. Every shaving of bone required his attention. He worked under dim lights while the station hummed around him, his fingers growing raw against the rough surface of the bone. He studied the material as he worked. The bone had a grain to it, like wood, running along its length in subtle lines that only became visible under careful examination. Danny learned to feel these lines with his fingertips, to understand where the bone wanted to be shaped and where it resisted. He adjusted his technique accordingly, working with the material instead of against it. A memory came to him as he worked. He saw his grandfather sitting on the porch of their family home in Montana, a deer antler in his weathered hands. The old man had spent his life making things with those hands: knives, tools, objects that served purposes and asked nothing in return except to be used. Danny remembered watching those hands work. He remembered the patience in every movement, the respect for the material, the understanding that a blade was not something you forced into existence, but something you coaxed out of hiding. His grandfather had told him something once, during a long afternoon of watching and learning. He said that anyone could make a weapon with the right tools. The real skill was making one without them. Danny kept that memory close as the hours passed. Morning brought his classmates back to the forge. They returned to their stations with fresh energy, eager to add finishing touches to weapons that had largely built themselves overnight. Arrived with his usual group of followers, his crystalline blade already beginning to take shape in its containment field. Living crystal hummed with contained plasma, adjusting its molecular structure according to patterns that had programmed into the assembler. Danny looked up from his work only briefly. The bone had begun to reveal its shape now, a curved form emerging from the rough exterior like something that had always been waiting inside. He returned his attention to the file in his hands. The day passed slowly. Students wandered through the forge, examining each other's progress and offering commentary that ranged from genuine interest to obvious competition. Several of them stopped at Danny's station, drawn by curiosity or the desire to mock. A student asked what Danny was making. Danny answered that he was making a blade. They looked at the rough bone shape and walked away without another word. Visited twice. The first time he simply watched in silence, his needle teeth visible in what might have been a smile. The second time he brought witnesses. He announced to the gathered students that they should observe human craftsmanship in action. He said this was what their galactic neighbors considered appropriate work for the forging trial. He suggested that perhaps the council had made a mistake admitting such a primitive species into the academy. Danny kept working. His hands knew what to do now. The file moved in steady strokes while his mind remained calm and focused. He would not give the reaction he wanted. A different figure appeared at his station after left. Danny looked up to find a massive standing over him, compound eyes reflecting the forge lights in fractured patterns. The mandibles clicked softly as it examined the bone taking shape under Danny's hands. Danny recognized him as a student who rarely spoke and mostly kept to himself. The had built his weapon quietly in a corner of the forge, drawing no attention and offering no commentary on anyone else's work. Asked Danny a question. He wanted to know why Danny had not simply accepted failure when he found no materials. He said any logical being would have recognized the impossibility of the situation and withdrawn from the trial. Danny considered the question while his hands continued working. He answered that his people had learned something a long time ago, back when they were still struggling to survive on a planet that wanted to kill them. He said that giving up was the only failure that truly mattered. Everything else was just a problem waiting to be solved. Studied Danny for a long moment. Then he nodded once and returned to his own station without another word. The second night came. Danny's hands had begun to bleed where the file had worn through skin. He wrapped them in strips torn from his training uniform and kept working. The blade was taking proper shape now, a curved edge emerging from the bone that reminded him of the hunting knives his grandfather used to make. A human voice interrupted his focus. Danny looked up to find Park standing at his station with a container of food in her hands. She was a year ahead of him at the academy, one of the few other humans in the entire program. Her face showed concern mixed with something that might have been admiration. She told Danny that he needed to eat. She said she had been watching him work for nearly 30 hours straight without stopping for food or rest. Danny accepted the container with gratitude. He ate quickly, his body suddenly aware of how hungry it had become. Sat with him while he ate. She told him that some of the instructors had placed bets on whether he would break under the pressure. She said most of them expected him to quit before the trial ended. Danny asked which way the bets were running. Smiled sadly. She said most of them thought he would fail, but she added that a few of them, including Instructor Al, had bet otherwise. She left him with a warning. She told him that whatever happened in the presentation ceremony, he should hold his head high. She said he had already proven something that most of his classmates would never understand. Danny thanked her and returned to his work. The bone blade waited for him, patient and demanding. He had 40 hours left. The rough shaping was nearly complete. Now came the most difficult part. Now he needed to give it an edge. Danny selected a flat stone from the basic tool supplies, the kind of thing his classmates had ignored in favor of plasma shapers and molecular grinders. He tested its surface against his thumb, feeling the fine grit that would slowly draw sharpness from the bone. He began the process his grandfather had called whispering the edge into being. Small strokes, careful pressure, patience beyond measure. The bone would tell him when it was ready. Danny settled in to listen. Danny had not slept in over 50 hours. His eyes burned with exhaustion. His hands throbbed beneath their makeshift bandages. Every muscle in his body ached from holding the same position for so long, hunched over his workstation with a stone in his grip, and a bone blade slowly taking shape beneath his careful strokes. But the edge was coming. He could feel it now, that moment his grandfather had described when the material stopped resisting and started cooperating. The bone had accepted his intentions. It understood what he wanted it to become. Now it was simply a matter of time and patience, two things Danny had in abundance. The final 12 hours of the forging trial had begun. Around the Grand Forge, his classmates added finishing touches to their weapons, polished his crystalline blade with a cloth made from woven light, the plasma contained within its structure humming with eager energy. A student calibrated the dimensional frequency of a sword that existed partially in another plane of reality. A pair of warriors tested the self-repair functions of blades made from living metal that healed itself when damaged. Danny ran his stone along the bone edge one more time. The technique required absolute focus. Each stroke had to follow the one before it with perfect consistency. The angle of pressure could not vary by more than a fraction of a degree. The speed had to remain constant, neither rushing nor dragging. Any mistake would create an imperfection in the edge that would weaken the entire blade. His grandfather had spent 40 years perfecting this technique. Danny had watched and learned whenever he visited Montana, storing away knowledge that seemed useless in an age of molecular assemblers and plasma cutters. He never imagined he would need these skills among the stars. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor. Hour by hour, the edge revealed itself. Danny switched to finer stones as the work progressed, each one drawing out more sharpness than the last. The bone blade began to gleam under the forge lights, its surface smooth and its curve elegant in its simplicity. It looked nothing like the technological marvels surrounding it, but it looked exactly like what it was meant to be. A hunting knife made for human hands by human skill. Danny set down his stone at the 69th hour of the trial. The edge was complete. He tested it against a scrap of fabric from his uniform and watched the material part without resistance. The blade cut clean and true. He used the remaining time to create a handle. He stripped fibers from the sleeves of his training uniform, braiding them together into a cord that he wrapped around the base of the blade. The grip was simple but functional, providing purchase for his hands without adding unnecessary weight or complexity. When he finished, Danny sat back and looked at what he had made. The bone blade measured roughly the length of his forearm, curved slightly along its edge with a point that tapered to a precise tip. Its surface showed the grain of the bone beneath a polish achieved through nothing but friction and patience. The handle wrapped neatly around its base. The fabric fibers darkened slightly where his bleeding hands had stained them during construction. It was not beautiful in the way that crystalline swords were beautiful. It did not hum with contained energy or shift between dimensions. It would not repair itself if damaged or adjust its length according to its wielder's thoughts. It was only a blade made from bone, shaped by hand and sharpened with stone. Danny held it for a long moment, feeling its balance and its weight. It fit his grip like it had been made for him, which of course it had. Every curve and contour reflected the shape of his hands, the strength of his arms, the intentions of his mind. A shadow fell across his station. Danny looked up to find standing over him again, the compound eyes fixed on the finished blade. Asked if he could hold it. His voice carried something that sounded almost like reverence. Danny handed over the blade without hesitation. He had nothing to hide and nothing to prove by refusing. He turned the weapon in his clawed hands, examining it from every angle. His mandibles clicked in a pattern Danny had learned to associate with deep thought. Finally, he spoke. He said that he had held many weapons in his life, training blades made by the finest smiths in the galaxy, ceremonial swords passed down through generations of warriors, technological marvels that could cut through starship armor like paper. He said that none of them had ever felt like this. None of them had ever felt so personal. Danny accepted the blade back with a nod of thanks. He understood what meant. A weapon built by machines belonged to anyone who could press the right buttons. A weapon built by hand belonged only to the hands that made it. Park appeared at his station one final time. She looked at the finished blade with an expression that mixed pride with worry. She told Danny that the presentation ceremony would begin soon. She wished him luck and said that regardless of what happened, he had already proven something important. Danny asked what he had proven. Smiled. She said he had proven that humans do not quit just because something is hard. She said he had proven that the old ways still had value, even in an age of wonders. She said he had proven that a warrior is more than the tools he carries. Then she left to take her place among the observers who would watch the ceremony. Danny stood alone at his station. Around him, his classmates gathered their finished weapons and began moving toward the presentation hall. Crystalline blades caught the light. Living metal shifted and flowed. Dimensional edges flickered between realities. Danny picked up his bone blade and followed them. The hall filled with instructors, dignitaries, and students from other courses. Everyone wanted to see what this year's cohort had created. Danny took his place at the end of the line, as his species' recent entry into galactic society demanded. He would present last. He would present his simple bone blade to judges who had seen every technological wonder the galaxy could offer. He gripped the handle tightly and waited for his turn. The first student stepped forward to begin the presentations. The ceremony had begun. The presentation hall stretched out before Danny like a theater designed for judgment. Rows of observers filled the elevated seating, their faces representing dozens of species and ranks. Instructors sat in the front rows with tablets ready to record their assessments. Dignitaries from various council worlds occupied places of honor near the central stage. Students from other courses crowded the back, eager to see what the weapons cohort had produced. At the center of it all sat High Arbiter Al, the ancient who had overseen academy examinations for longer than most species kept records. Her skin had faded to the color of old paper, and her eyes had seen the rise and fall of civilizations. When she spoke, even the most powerful beings in the galaxy listened. One by one, students stepped forward to present their creations. A warrior displayed a blade of compressed starlight, explaining how its edge could cut through energy shields as easily as flesh. High Arbiter Al examined it with appropriate interest and made notes on her tablet. A pair presented twin swords that shared a telepathic link, allowing their wielders to coordinate attacks across impossible distances. The crowd murmured with appreciation. A student showed a massive cleaver made from living metal that would grow stronger with each battle it survived, feeding on the energy of its victims. Several instructors leaned forward with genuine curiosity. Presented his weapon quietly, a practical blade without flashy features that drew polite acknowledgement but little excitement. Then took the stage. The moved with the confidence of someone who already knew he had won. His crystalline blade caught the light and scattered it into rainbows across the hall walls. He explained its features in a voice designed to carry to every corner of the room. The blade could adjust its length with a thought. Its edge vibrated at frequencies that could disrupt molecular bonds. The plasma contained within its structure could be released in controlled bursts for ranged attacks. It would repair any damage within seconds, using ambient energy. High Arbiter Al examined the weapon for a long time. When she finished, she declared it exceptional work, returned to his place with a smile that showed every one of his needle-sharp teeth. 22 presentations passed. 22 weapons of technological wonder received their moment of recognition. Then they called for the human. Danny walked forward into sudden silence. Every eye in the hall turned toward him, toward the simple bone blade in his hands. He heard whispers spreading through the crowd like wind through grass. Someone laughed, quickly stifled. He reached the presentation stage and stood before High Arbiter Al. The ancient looked at him with eyes that revealed nothing. Her gaze dropped to the blade in his hands. She extended her palm, and Danny placed the bone blade across it. The silence in the hall deepened. Danny could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. Somewhere in the crowd, he knew Admiral Grace was watching, the human military observer who had come to assess humanity's progress at the Academy. He wondered what she was thinking. High Arbiter Al turned the blade slowly in her ancient hands. She examined the edge, the curve, the grain of the bone visible beneath its polished surface. She ran one finger along the wrapped handle and paused at the dark stains where Danny's blood had soaked into the fibers. She asked Danny to explain his weapon. Danny spoke simply. He said it was a blade made from bone, shaped by hand and sharpened with stone. He said it had no special properties. It would not repair itself or adjust its form. It could not cut through energy shields or vibrate at special frequencies. It was only what it was and nothing more. A voice interrupted from the crowd. Stepped forward, his face twisted with contempt. He demanded to know how such primitive work could be judged alongside true craftsmanship. He said this was an insult to everyone who had put genuine effort into the trial. Instructor Al silenced him with a look. His forearms crossed over his bronze-scaled chest, and something in his posture warned against further outbursts. High Arbiter Al continued as if no interruption had occurred. She asked Danny one simple question. What is the purpose of a weapon? Danny considered his answer carefully. He said that a weapon existed to be an extension of the one who wielded it, nothing more and nothing less. A blade that did everything for its wielder was not a weapon but a crutch. A true weapon waited to be guided by skill and will. High Arbiter Al held his gaze for a long moment. Then she called for a demonstration. Attendants brought out blocks of standard testing material, the dense composite used to evaluate weapon effectiveness across the galaxy. Each block stood as tall as Danny's knee and just as wide, designed to resist casual cutting while yielding to proper technique. She ordered each student to cut through their block. The technological swords performed exactly as expected. Crystalline blades sang through the material. Living metal cleaved it apart. Dimensional edges passed through it like it did not exist. Each student completed their cut in seconds, their weapons doing most of the work for them. Then Danny stepped up to his block. The hall fell silent again. He could feel hundreds of eyes on his back. He heard someone whisper a prediction of failure. Danny raised the bone blade. He felt its weight settle into his grip, familiar now after 72 hours of shaping and sharpening. He brought it down in a single clean stroke, letting his body guide the motion rather than forcing it. The blade passed through the testing material and emerged clean on the other side. Danny stepped back. The block split apart and fell to the stage floor in two perfect halves. Silence held the hall for 3 long heartbeats. Then Instructor Al stepped forward. He examined the cut surface with an expert eye, running his clawed fingers along the edge where the bone blade had passed. He turned to face the crowd. He declared that the edge was flawless. He said the cut was as clean as any made by the technological weapons before it. High Arbiter Al rose from her seat. She held up the bone blade for all to see. She announced that this weapon demonstrated something none of the others possessed. She said it carried the undivided will of its creator in every line and curve. She ranked it among the top 3 submissions of the trial. Chaos erupted. Students shouted protests, pushed forward through the crowd, demanding an explanation for what he called an obvious injustice. High Arbiter Al raised one ancient hand. The hall fell silent instantly. She began to explain her judgment. High Arbiter Al stood at the center of the stage with the bone blade still in her hands. Her ancient eyes swept across the assembled students, instructors, and dignitaries. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of centuries. She said that every technological wonder created in this trial had required machines to build, programs to design, and materials that any student with sufficient access could have used. She said that 22 students had entered the Grand Forge with every advantage the Academy could provide. They had emerged with weapons that reflected those advantages perfectly. One student had entered with nothing. He had emerged with something equally functional, created through nothing but his own skill and determination. She asked the crowd to consider what that meant. The hall remained silent. Even had stopped his protests, though his face still twisted with anger he could not express. High Arbiter Al continued. She quoted an ancient teaching that had guided her people for thousands of years. The weapon reveals the warrior. She said that the technological swords revealed students who relied on tools beyond themselves. The bone blade revealed a warrior who needed nothing but his own hands and will. She returned the blade to Danny with something that might have been respect in her ancient eyes. Then she stepped back and yielded the stage to Instructor Al. The warrior moved to the center of the platform. His 4 arms hung loose at his sides, and his bronze-scaled face showed an expression Danny had never seen before. It looked almost like satisfaction. He addressed the class directly. He admitted what many had already suspected. He had deliberately ensured that Danny would have no quality materials for the trial. He had watched the other students coordinate to leave the human with nothing, and he had done nothing to stop them. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Some students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Instructor Al continued. He said that this was the true test of the forging trial, though most students never realized it. The trial was not designed to see who could build the most impressive weapon. It was designed to see who could build any weapon when all advantages were stripped away. He pointed to his crystalline blade, still humming with contained plasma in its creator's hands. He said it was magnificent work. He said it required everything the Academy could provide: unlimited materials, advanced machines, programming knowledge passed down through generations of weaponsmiths. Then he pointed to Danny's bone blade. He said it required only Danny. He asked the students which of those 2 warriors they would want beside them when everything went wrong. When the machines failed, and the supplies ran out, and the only thing standing between survival and death was what they could create with their bare hands. The hall fell silent again. This time the silence felt different. This time it felt thoughtful. Instructor Al dismissed the cohort with orders to reflect on what they had witnessed. Students filed out slowly, many of them casting glances at Danny as they passed. Some looks held resentment. Others held something that might have been the beginning of respect. Pushed past Danny without a word. His crystalline blade clutched tight against his chest like a child protecting a favorite toy. The crowd dispersed over the following minutes. Admiral Grace approached Danny before leaving. The human military observer stood nearly as tall as some of the alien species around her uniform crisp and her expression carefully controlled. She told Danny that humanity's reputation at the Academy had changed forever because of what he had done today. She said she would include a full report of his performance in her communications to Earth. Then she nodded once and walked away. Found Danny on the observation deck that evening. The had sought him out deliberately, tracking him through the station's corridors to this quiet place where stars wheeled slowly past massive windows. Danny stood alone at the glass, the bone blade hanging at his hip in a simple loop he had fashioned from more uniform fabric. He looked up when shadow fell across him. They asked if Danny would teach him. He said he wanted to learn the old ways of human craftsmanship, the techniques that required nothing but hands and will. He said he had spent his whole life believing that better tools made better warriors. Today, he had learned something different. Danny agreed. He said he would teach anyone who wanted to learn. Over the following days, other students began approaching with similar requests. I wanted to understand how humans worked without telepathic coordination. I asked about the techniques Danny had used to shape the bone. Even a few warriors set aside their pride long enough to request instruction. Danny taught them all. He showed them how to read the grain of materials, how to feel when a blade was ready for the next stage of shaping, how to listen to what they were creating instead of forcing it into predetermined forms. Some students learned quickly. Others struggled with concepts that had no technological shortcuts. All of them emerged with new understanding. Instructor Al summoned Danny to his office on the 7th day after the trial. He sat behind a desk carved from the bone of some massive creature, his 4 arms folded in a posture of formal address. He presented Danny with a gift, a sheath for the bone blade, crafted from traditional materials by the instructor's own hands. The leather-like covering fit the weapon perfectly, holding it secure while allowing for quick drawing. Instructor Al said that Danny had taught the class a lesson that the instructor himself could never have delivered. He said that the most dangerous warrior was not the one with the best equipment, but the one who could turn anything into a weapon. Danny accepted the gift with gratitude and respect. He secured the sheath to his belt and felt the bone blade settle against his hip like it belonged there. He walked through the academy halls that afternoon, no longer invisible among his classmates. Students nodded as he passed. Some offered greetings. A few asked questions about techniques he had demonstrated in his impromptu teaching sessions. Danny passed in a corridor near the training grounds. They stopped walking. For a long moment, the 2 students stood facing each other in silence. Then nodded once. It was small, barely noticeable, but it was there. He walked away without speaking, but something in his posture had changed. The contempt was gone. In its place was something that might eventually become respect. Danny continued to the observation deck. He stood at the window where he had stood so many times before, watching stars drift past in their eternal dance. The bone blade hung warm against his hip, a reminder of what hands and will could accomplish. He thought of his grandfather in Montana, carving beauty from antler with nothing but patience and skill. He thought of all the generations before him who had survived by making something from nothing. Humanity had entered the galaxy as the youngest species, dismissed by many as too primitive to belong among the stars. Danny smiled at his reflection in the window glass. They would learn.